Hi everyone, Mark here. It is a Q&A episode today with David and me, which we recorded a little earlier, and we will get to it in a moment. But first, just one story dominating over the course of the weekend: the tragic floods down in Texas. So many people killed, such tragedy for so many people, and so many so young as well. It really has been awful. President Trump has been in touch with the authorities down there through the course of the weekend. He's been at his Bedminster Golf Club over the weekend, but he has said that he will travel down to Texas probably on Friday. It's always a real juggle for presidents to know when the right moment to go is. If they go too early, they run the risk of disrupting the rescue operation. If they don't go at all or go too late, then they get criticized. President Trump has said Friday. He had sent his Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem down there and has signed a major disaster declaration for the area to boost resources. The White House is also pushing back on suggestions that cuts imposed by President Trump to the US Weather Service might have impacted the warnings that were issued. So yes, predictably, it has all got very political very quickly. Two other big stories to watch over the course of the next few days here in DC. First, the visit of the Israeli Prime Minister. He arrived in DC late on Sunday night. And I've been told he's actually going to be here till Thursday, which is a very long time for him to be in the US. He will meet all of Trump's foreign policy team, and there will be a dinner tonight, Monday night, with the president. The focus, of course, will be on Gaza. Hamas delivered its response to the latest Israeli ceasefire proposal. That response was issued on Friday. The Israelis then said that it was no good, but they still sent a team of negotiators to Doha. So the sense is that there is some progress.
I think there's a good chance we have a deal with Hamas during the coming week, pertaining to quite a few of the hostages. Yeah.
We will also watch for news on tariffs, because remember Liberation Day, all those months ago, massive global tariffs issued by the president. Remember then how he issued a pause for 90 days because everyone got a bit worried about the tariffs, or so he believed, and the markets went crazy. Well, those 90 days are almost up. Wednesday, that pause runs out. And guess what? Only a handful of deals have emerged. And so what will happen? Will he reimpose the tariffs, or will he issue more pauses? We will see. We will get to that and all of the stuff we don't yet know about over the course of the next few days. So stay tuned, and stay tuned right now for the Q&A episode with David and me. Hello, I'm Mark Stone.
And I'm David Blevins.
And it's Monday, the 7th of July, day 168 of Donald Trump's second term. And on Trump 100 today, we are answering your questions, my favourite Q&A episode.
And we are answering them, Mark, for listeners in faraway places.
We are indeed. We asked where the most far-flung listeners were, and we've got a few answers, so we will get to that in a moment. But first, let's get straight into it. First question, David, is from Louise, and she writes, I'm so glad to have your insights so far in this dizzying presidency, and would love to have your updated thoughts on Trump's UK state visit. Following the No Kings protests, she writes, and a seeming downturn in approval rating stateside for Donald Trump, what are your expectations for his UK welcome?
Well, Louise, you're really asking, will the No Kings protests in the US become a one king is enough protests in the UK? President Trump's state visit isn't scheduled until September. So in the case of this presidency, that is a lifetime away. Things change not by the day, but by the hour when he's in the mood for posting online. Many think Sir Keir Starmer's letter from the King was a stroke of diplomatic genius. But the reaction to an unprecedented state visit has been a bit mixed. Many are uneasy about it, given his clash with Zelensky, the suspension of military aid to Ukraine, his decision to bomb Iran, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza as a result of the war, the tariffs. 250,000 people signed an online petition calling for this visit to be cancelled.
I didn't know that. That's a lot.
A lot. 250,000. But others recognise the diplomatic value, of course, in maintaining this special relationship, UK-US relations, even if they disagree with Donald Trump's policies.
Yeah, as you say, it's set for mid-September. That's according to the chatter here in DC. All I would add is that I think there is some nervousness in the British government about this visit. There will be protests, but how close these protests will be to Trump himself, how much of them he will actually see, let's see. I'm not so sure he will see much of it. The visit will be focused around Windsor, not Buckingham Palace, because that's under some refurbishment. And I think Windsor does allow for a more sterile environment. The public can be kept at somewhat of a distance. Now then, a question from Nizar in California, who says, your podcasts are excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nizar. It's good to hear. He asks, is it true that Trump's big, beautiful bill gives him the power to overturn the results of any elections in the United States?
Well, thanks for that. The simple answer to the question is no. There is nothing in the legislation that would allow Trump, or any future president for that matter, to stop an election from being ratified going forward. According to the legal experts, a constitutional amendment would have to pass for anyone to have that ability to cancel a federal election. The bill does empower him to implement much of his second-term agenda, $170 billion monopoly money set aside for border security, for example.
Yeah, so expect his policy platform to be supercharged with the passing of that bill on Thursday afternoon.
Now, Mark, a question from Susan, who says the podcast keeps her occupied on her morning dog walks. How is it possible that, with all the combined intelligence gathering prowess of MI6, CIA, Mossad, etc., Iran were allegedly able to get as close as they were to a functioning nuclear weapon without anyone knowing? Did all the Western intelligence agencies fail, or were Iran never actually that close?
Well, hello, Susan. On your dog walk, I assume you're on another one. I actually, if you don't mind me saying, I think the premise of your question is slightly wrong, Susan, because I think it is, in fact, the combined work of these spy agencies that you mentioned that has actually created the success in tracking Iran's progress towards a nuclear weapon. The intelligence agencies have been across all of this for decades. And they haven't been alone. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA as it's known, that's the UN's nuclear watchdog, that too has been monitoring Iran's nuclear sites through the years, and Tehran has been increasingly obstructive. And vitally, this is the really important bit, Iran has admitted that they have enriched uranium to 60%. So if their nuclear ambitions really were purely civilian, there would be no need to do that. You do not need uranium enriched to 60% for civil purposes. Now, all that said, it does take a jump, albeit a small one, to go from 60% enriched uranium to weapons-grade uranium, which is about 90%. And then, of course, you do need the ability to deliver the weapon. You need to be able to put that nuclear weapon onto a missile in order to fire it wherever you want to fire it. And all of that takes time. So where there is disagreement, I think, is over the intent. Was Iran about to make that jump to a bomb? And crucially, does the fact that the Americans and the Israelis undermined the negotiations by bombing Iran, does that actually make it more likely that the Iranian regime will go deeper underground, literally, and not allow any inspectors in? So, Susan, I think the real fear now is what do they do with the 60% enriched uranium, which experts seem to think was not destroyed. If they can get weapons-grade uranium and a delivery system, it doesn't need to be a missile, could be drones, well, then things get really very dangerous indeed. Now, David, two questions related. The first is from Phil. He asks, I'm pretty sure the US Constitution is clear that only Congress can decide on the country going to war. And this from Linda, who says, I was under the impression that the US government comprises the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the President. Legislation has to follow processes, and the House could block any arbitrary presidential decisions. It seems to me that at the moment the country is being run as a dictatorship, so says Linda, with no debate being heard from the elected representatives, or nothing is being reported. How can this be, she asks?
Well, the Constitution does give Congress the power to declare war. It's Article 1, Section 8, if you want to go off and read it. And Article 2 lists the President as Commander-in-Chief and gives him the power, or her in future, to direct military operations, not unilaterally declare war. But in recent history, presidents have used military force without a formal declaration of war. We've just got to think back to Iraq and Afghanistan. So both in theory and in law, only Congress can declare war. But presidents have sidestepped that with debatable authority in the past. In terms of the processes of the House, the Senate and the presidency, Republicans control all three right now, the trifecta. That's not unusual. Trump had that in his first term, as did Obama and Clinton and Biden. But Trump has the edge because 6 of the 9 members of the Supreme Court are, of course, Republican appointees. Only 2 other presidents have had that degree of influence. A question from Ian now. When Trump has a call with Putin or any other leader, is it recorded and made public, or is it just a secret call?
Good question, Ian. Officially, they are not recorded, no. But it is hard to say that for sure with President Trump. He likes to do things his way. Standard practice for these phone calls, and there was one on Thursday last week between Trump and Putin. I think the 5th call that they've had. The standard practice is that aides, usually from the National Security Council, but they could be White House staff as well, they take detailed notes. A stenographer might be present too to transcribe the call in real time. As journalists, what we get is what are known as readouts of the conversations, and both sides will do this. So in the case of Trump and Putin, you'll get a Kremlin readout, you'll get a White House readout, and what's always quite fascinating is to see how they vary, because they'll both be putting their own spin on how they think the call went.
Can seem like 2 different meetings.
It very often can, yeah, which is always fascinating. There is a bit of history here, incidentally, because I say that officially they're not recorded, but actually many presidents over the years have secretly recorded these calls. President Nixon installed a taping system into the White House to secretly record meetings and discussions. JFK famously made audio recordings of meetings which dealt with national security and foreign policy issues. And Roosevelt, FDR, he too made some secret recordings. And hundreds of hours of these tapes have, over the years, been declassified. So we may, in a few years' time, find out what Trump and Putin were talking about. Now, 2 questions from Peter in Worcestershire, where I grew up, incidentally. So there you go. Hi, Peter. Hello, Worcestershire. I watched Trump being interviewed on Air Force One, says Peter, flying back from the G7. Who and how are the press interviews chosen? That's a very good question. Will we ever? And a second question, will we ever see Trump's tax returns from his pre- and post-presidency period?
Peter, the White House can't accommodate every reporter and photographer at every event, so there is a pool system, a limited number of journalists who cover the president on any given day. Basically what that means is US television networks, radio broadcasters, print journalists and photographers each take their turn on rotation. The pool used to be completely independent, organised by the White House Correspondents Association, but that has changed under Trump. His White House has now added a secondary broadcaster, generally a conservative, to the pool. Their questions tend to be, well, as you've heard, not questions, but affirmations. And wire services, that's the Associated Press, Bloomberg and Reuters, used to have a permanent place in the pool, but that's been scrapped too, so it's all change.
It is, and a case in point, Peter, on Trump's trip last week to Alligator Alcatraz, that new migrant detention center down in Florida, there were a few pool reporters there. The so-called fake news was there. ABC, I think, was one of the pooled reporters, the sort of legacy media. But there were others there as well, who I think many would say are not necessarily your traditional journalists. There were some podcasters there, not from Trump100, I hasten to add. There were some influencers there as well, friendly podcasters, friendly influencers, which makes for, well, not much scrutiny of the president. So he is, we've said it before, he is a very accessible president. There's no question about that. We see more of him. He's out there. He's answering questions a lot more than Joe Biden ever did. But because of the makeup of these bubbles where you've got this pool and a few extras, very often he's not actually pushed very hard. And the other thing that always surprises me, I mean, I've worked here in America for quite a few years now, and there's a sort of deference for the presidency. People feel that they've got to be quite, polite and gentle in asking the president, whoever the president is, questions. So there's a very different vibe from like Downing Street, or I worked in Brussels where we'd be shouting questions at the commissioners at the European Commission and all that sort of stuff. it doesn't really happen in that way here. It's kind of different, which always I find curious.
Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, describes Trump as the most transparent president in history. But of course, transparency and accountability are two very different things.
Yeah, and transparency and accessibility are two very different things.
As for the second question, will we ever see Trump's tax returns? The president has dodged this question at every turn, and while your interest in it, Peter, hasn't waned, some of the focus has. It was a huge talking point, you will remember, in the 2016 election campaign, but it barely featured in 2024. Tony asks a good question on the different approach to different wars. Trump clearly said that Ukraine was not his war, not the US's war. It's over there. It's Europe's war. So what makes Israel versus Iran Trump's war, the US's war? It's over there. It's not the US's war. Why does he provide endless arms support to Israel and threaten to take support from Ukraine? Not just threaten, but carry that out.
Well, there are deep historical links between the United States and Israel. I think the US, under different presidencies, left, right, they feel bound to Israel in a way that Trump certainly does not to Ukraine. There is a sort of strategic value to Israel for the United States. Trump doesn't actually, I don't think, see Iran or the Middle East as America's war either. He's been quite clear about that. You know, so in that sense, I kind of disagree with a bit of what of the question there. He would like to be able to say the Middle East's not our problem either, but he does recognise that Iran having a nuclear weapon is a problem, and so to that point, that's why he kind of wanted to just to quickly bomb Iran and then withdraw and be like, we've done our bit, nothing to do with us now. In an ideal world, he sees the ideal world as having spheres of influence, and the American sphere of influence is the Western hemisphere, hence all the stuff about Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal. Now, David, to our geographical reach, what is our sphere of influence?
Far and wide.
Certainly seems to be. I don't know how influential we are, but we're certainly being listened to far and wide. We asked about whether there was anyone listening further away from Australia, because we've got a few listeners there. The Kiwis, they're listening.
Splendid.
Rob has written, listening to the Q&A, and you asked anyone further than Australia is listening. I am in New Zealand, a couple of 100 miles further away. Love the pod. Love the pod? Love the pod, says Rob.
And we thought the rivalry was between the United States and Canada. That's all we've got time for on today's episode of Trump 100. Thank you for listening. And if you want to get in touch, you can do so at Trump100@sky.uk.
And we will be back for another rollercoaster week here in Trumpland. So stay tuned, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.